A hand reaches into shallow water at dusk. For a moment, nothing happens. The surface is still. Somewhere behind the reeds, an insect stops calling, as if it too is waiting to see what happens next. Then, fingers close around something small, cold, and trembling, and the hand pulls back into the fading light. It is the same motion a human being has performed for thousands of years, in 100 languages, on every inhabited continent except one. A creature is lifted from the mud, examined for half a second, and a decision is made. Not a decision anyone remembers making. A decision that feels older than memory itself. Most people assume this decision comes from biology, that some animals are simply edible and others simply are not, the way some plants are food and others are poison. That assumption is comforting, because the frog and the toad, in that hand, in that instant, are almost the same animal. And the space between dinner and danger turns out to be much thinner than anyone wants to admit. Zoologically, the line between a frog and a toad barely exists. Toads are, in the strictest biological sense, simply a branch of frogs, a lineage that evolved drier skin, shorter legs, and a life spent walking instead of leaping. Strip away the folk categories, the childhood picture books, the cartoon witches with their bubbling cauldrons, and you are left with two cousins from the same order, separated by a difference so small that many of the world's languages don't even bother naming it. Spanish uses one word for both. So does Portuguese. So do dozens of others, spoken by people who have lived beside these creatures for generations, without ever needing to draw the line English draws so confidently. And yet, across cultures that never met, that never traded recipes, that never shared a single word of language, the same pattern keeps appearing, almost like a signal broadcast into the collective human mind. The frog goes into the pot, the toad does not. Not sometimes, not in one region. Everywhere the two animals coexist. This is where the story stops being about biology and starts being about something the human body seems to have learned to fear, long before the human mind ever understood why. In 2019, researchers studying the skin secretions of common toads found something that, on paper, should not have surprised anyone, and yet did, once they understood exactly what they were looking at. The glands running along a toad's back and clustered densely behind its eyes were producing a cocktail of steroid compounds known as bufotoxins. Chemically, these compounds are close relatives of substances used in carefully controlled medical doses to restart a failing human heart. In uncontrolled doses, the kind a predator would encounter biting down in the dark, the same family of molecules does the opposite. It doesn't start a heart, it stops one. A frog's skin tells a different chemical story. It is, in most species, a thinner and more permeable surface, built primarily for breathing rather than defense. Some frogs do carry their own devastating toxins. The brilliant poison frogs of Central and South America are proof of that. But across the vast majority of species that humans actually encountered while wading through rivers, rice paddies, and monsoon-flooded fields, the frog's skin was, chemically speaking, almost silent. The toad's skin was not silent at all. It is tempting to stop here, to conclude this is simply a story of humans slowly learning, generation after generation, which animals were safe to touch and which were not. A tidy lesson passed from parent to child, like fire is hot or the river floods in spring. But that explanation misses something stranger, something that doesn't behave like a lesson at all. The aversion to a toad's skin isn't just cultural. It's immediate. It shows up in children who have never been taught the difference, in adults who have never once seen a toad secrete anything harmful, in people separated by oceans, by centuries, by entirely unrelated belief systems, who nonetheless recoil, almost identically, the instant their fingers make contact with that dry, warty texture. What if the knowledge was never taught at all? There is a theory, still debated, still unresolved, that the human aversion to toad skin isn't cultural learning in the way we normally understand it. It isn't a lesson passed down in words. It's something closer to inherited memory. Not the memory of any single event, not a story anyone could tell, but the compressed residue of thousands of generations in which the humans who hesitated before touching something warty and dry simply survived, and the humans who didn't hesitate quietly stopped existing and stopped passing anything on at all. Not a lesson, a filter. If that theory is correct, then every time a hand pulls back from a toad in the dark, something is happening that has nothing to do with that particular hand, or that particular toad, or even that particular century. An old signal is firing, a signal shaped by every ancestor who ever guessed wrong and paid the final price for it, compressed across deep time into a single flicker of disgust that arrives before conscious thought has time to catch up. Disgust, in this light, stops looking like a simple emotion. It starts looking like a message, sent from the dead to the living, arriving with no return address and no explanation, only an instruction. Don't. But biology alone still doesn't explain everything, because the frog wasn't simply tolerated by human cultures the way one tolerates a necessary risk. It was elevated. In parts of France, frog legs became refined enough to signal sophistication, a dish served in white tablecloth restaurants, ordered by people who would never dream of foraging a riverbank themselves. In Southeast Asia, frog became a staple protein, farmed deliberately, raised in ponds with the same careful attention given to fish or fowl, sold in markets beside vegetables and rice. Somewhere in that transition, an animal that once represented mere survival, a desperate meal caught in a lean season, became an animal that represented pleasure, comfort, even luxury. The toad never made that journey. Not once. Not anywhere on Earth. Instead, it made a different journey entirely. Into folklore. Into witches' cauldrons and cursed wells, and whispered warnings about warts spreading from its skin to human hands. A myth with no basis whatsoever in what the toad's body actually does. And yet a myth so persistent, it outlived centuries of scientific correction, medical textbooks, and biology classrooms. Two animals, one evolutionary branch apart, separated by a difference smaller than the gap between two dog breeds. One became dinner, the other became a symbol of everything unclean, uncanny, and worth fearing in the natural world. The difference between them was never really about danger. It was about what each animal came to represent inside the human imagination. And imagination, once it decides what something means, rarely bothers checking the facts again. There is something else worth noticing here, something easy to miss the first time through. The toad's body isn't just chemically defended, it's visually built to broadcast that defense before any contact is ever made. The warty texture, the dull, earth-toned skin, the wide, low posture, squat and still, utterly unlike the frog's sleek, spring-loaded silhouette poised for a leap. Evolution didn't just give the toad a poison, it gave the toad a warning label, written not in words, but in shape, in texture, in the particular way light refuses to catch on that dry, bumpy surface. A visual grammar so effective, it works on species that have never encountered a toad before in their evolutionary history. Which means the toad's greatest evolutionary achievement isn't the poison itself, it's convincing you not to find out. And in a strange, roundabout way, this is also the toad's tragedy. Because that same success, that unmistakable visual signal of stay away, is precisely what condemned it to a permanent role as the villain in a story it never asked to be part of. The frog, smooth and quick and comparatively unarmed, became the hero simply by looking approachable. The toad became the monster simply by looking exactly like what it needed to look like to survive. Neither animal chose its role. Both were cast the moment their skin finished evolving. And this is where the story stops being about frogs and toads at all. Because the same pattern, a near identical pair of things, split by an almost invisible line, sorted instantly into safe and other, is not unique to amphibians. It is the same architecture the human mind uses to sort unfamiliar foods, unfamiliar strangers, unfamiliar ideas. A fast, ancient filter running quietly in the background, making decisions long before conscious reasoning ever arrives to offer its explanation. Sometimes that filter saves a life, the way it saved the lives of every ancestor who hesitated at the sight of a warty, dry-skinned creature in the grass. But sometimes it does something else entirely. Sometimes it simply calcifies, hardening into prejudice, into superstition, into folklore that outlives its usefulness by centuries, wearing the disguise of instinct long after the original danger has been fully understood and explained. The frog and the toad never asked to become a parable. They only wanted to survive the wet season, find enough insects, avoid the shadow of a heron passing overhead. They lived their entire evolutionary histories with no awareness that a species on a completely different branch of the tree of life would one day divide them so completely, one into cuisine, the other into curse. But somewhere along the riverbank, in the space between one hand reaching down and another pulling back, they became something else. A quiet demonstration of how little separates acceptable from forbidden, and how much of that separation was decided long before any of us were born to question it. Decided not by careful thought, but by an ancient, wordless filter passed down through bodies that no longer remember why they carry it. The next time something warty and dry touches your palm in the dark, notice the recoil. Notice how fast it arrives. Faster than thought, faster than reason, faster than any explanation you could offer for why you just pulled your hand back. It arrives before you do, and it has been waiting there in the body for longer than the mind has existed to wonder why.